Welcome to Living Outside the Matrix, the show where we take a fresh look at things we think we already know about, where we challenge ourselves to examine important issues that can affect our lifestyle choices. Hi there, I'm your host, Nigel Howitt, and today we're going to discuss becoming more conscious, arguably a very, very important issue. It can benefit all of us individually and perhaps humanity at large as well. Firstly, I'd just like to say that I don't claim to be any expert on the topic, and I certainly don't claim to have the last word on it. So I'm just one thinking guy sharing my thoughts and observations with you, and hopefully they might benefit you. The other thing I'd like to point out is that I'm an atheist, so for me the concept of becoming more conscious has nothing to do with any supernatural being or any religion or any mysticism of any kind. It's a purely practical, day-to-day, down-to-earth, helpful concept that I believe we can all benefit from. So with that said, we're going to examine what does it mean to become more conscious? Why is it so important to become more conscious? What does it actually look like in practice, becoming more conscious, and how can we actually do it? What practical measures can we take in order to ensure that we might become more conscious? What exactly does it mean to become more conscious? Well, at its most basic level, to be conscious means to be actively engaged with one's sensory perception, so as to be aware of one's surroundings or environment or other kind of stimuli. This is a sort of basic ground zero of being conscious. That's the definition that I'm using. Being conscious is also often associated with being conscious of something or aware of something. So from this basic level of being conscious of our surroundings and being awake or cognitively active, you could say, we can then become aware of more and more. We can add to our awareness and potentially keep adding to it and building an ever larger picture of our world, of our reality. So we can see that for human beings at least, being conscious is a state of awareness that occurs on a sliding scale. Okay, it's not an on-off sort of binary situation. There's being engaged with your sensory perception, awake, aware of where you are and what's around you, for example. But then you can become aware of more and more. You can be conscious of more and more things, and therefore move up the sliding scale and become more conscious in an overall sense. So we can move on to become, for example, aware of, we can introspect, we can become aware of our inner world as well. That's an important one to mention. But it's important to notice that to gain an increasing awareness takes effort, and it doesn't actually happen automatically. It's something we have to initiate and do. So why is becoming more conscious so desirable? Why is it important? Why would we want to even consider it? Well, consciousness for any entity which possesses it is its means of survival. It is their means of guidance to choose appropriate action and to support the continuance of the organism's life. And in the present context of the world, of planet Earth in 2018, I would suggest that becoming more conscious is very literally a means of survival for us human beings, but perhaps in a broader sense than many realize. Yes, we need to be conscious in order to avoid stepping out in front of a bus, and killing ourselves. But we need to be, if we zoom out a bit, we need to be aware of many more hidden dangers than that. We need to be very aware of all the toxicity around us, for example. What's the right food to eat? The dangers of EMFs. Is the water safe? There are many, many things that threaten our well-being in the context of today's world that we need to become conscious of. And we can't just take it all for granted that everything's okay in a way that perhaps people could in generations past. So we need to be aware of, even factors that, for example, affect our fertility and therefore the actual survival, the long-term survival of the human race, as well as our own descendants, of course. So becoming more conscious is also a way of transcending any form of mind control. As we become more conscious, as we assume control of our own thoughts more deliberately and become aware of more things, this is absolutely the way out of the matrix, as I talk about it, and the way to take control of our own mind. But it's also the way to success. It's the way to thrive, because it's the only way that we can really adapt to a changing and threatening, potentially threatening context, is by becoming more conscious. We need to up our game. We need to seek more information all the time. And I would suggest that those who become more conscious, those who deliberately seek to become more conscious, will inevitably achieve an evolutionary advantage, if you like, over those who decline to bother. So the more we move ourselves up this sliding scale of awareness, the better we position ourselves to deal with the many hidden challenges of modern life, and the easier it is to spot the disinformation, what I call the duff steers within the matrix. The easier it is to spot the simply incorrect information. For example, that tap water is safe to drink, and that mercury amalgam fillings are safe in your mouth, and all these sorts of things. So many around diet, and so many around mobile phone use, for example. There are many hidden dangers that threaten our well-being that we can only learn to appreciate through deliberately seeking to become more conscious. So it's a very everyday, practical thing. Becoming more conscious also renders us more likely to recognize propaganda, and be able to sift the disinformation from the genuinely useful information in our midst. It renders us more likely to achieve a certain level of intellectual independence that is absolutely necessary for us to sort of separate ourselves from the herd mentality and step out and make choices that perhaps go against the mainstream, that might even go against our friends and our family and our loved ones. But nevertheless, they may be beneficial decisions that actually support our well-being. So what does it look like? What does becoming more conscious look like? As previously mentioned, it's a totally practical thing. It's got little to do with a spiritual awakening or anything like that from my perspective. And one of the first examples of it, we could say that growing up into adulthood is becoming more conscious to some perhaps limited extent. Adults generally have more awareness and are conscious of more things than children, if only just a little bit more. Genuine adulthood should mean that we all know what is good for us and what is not in every sense. And again, this would include a broad range of topics of things that either support or undermine our well-being. The old mantra of eat a low-fat diet. You must avoid that saturated fat. This is simply wrong, and it undermines our well-being. So we must gain more conscious awareness to appreciate all of these facts. becoming more conscious and enjoying a greater awareness means seeing one's life in an ever greater context. It means sort of zooming out, if you like. It means looking down from that sort of 30,000 foot view, instead of sort of, getting tunnel vision and getting overly preoccupied on the minutiae of our lives around us. A broader context is always a useful thing to have. And it is the process of acquiring knowledge of reality that gives us this broader context, so that we're better able to function in the world, in our lives, the more we know about the context in which we're living. And the philosopher Francis Bacon once wrote, "We must obey the forces we want to command." And this means we have to respect reality if we want to effectively shape it and change things in the shape of our values. So the first step is knowledge. We have to have knowledge of reality in order to act effectively within it. So the first step to gaining this greater context, this 30,000 foot view, is to accumulate knowledge. And knowledge, we must remember, of course, is the correct identification of some aspect of reality. And so gaining knowledge is essential to becoming more conscious of our greater context in which our lives are actually happening. It's essential to gain knowledge, to be proactive in that. It's also important to realize, just as a quick aside, it's important to realize that all of our knowledge of this context in which we're living doesn't have to be held in our conscious mind all the time. It's stored in our subconscious, and it's there as soon as we, somebody asks us a question, or you ask yourself a question in thought or with words, and up it pops from your subconscious mind. So the greater context and this huge sum of non-contradictory knowledge that we acquire is not necessarily all held in our consciousness. It's just an important point to appreciate. Also, another manifestation, if you like, of becoming more consciousness is knowing and understanding our own motivations. This can be really, really helpful. Helpful for effectiveness in relationships, in managing our life, in choosing our goals and our values, in choosing what job to do, in every aspect of our choices. If we introspect and become more conscious of our own motivations, of how we tick, it's incredibly useful in our lives. It really, as I said, it really helps in understanding our underlying values that drive us. So this is an area where becoming more conscious can really, really help. And lastly, I would say that holding our philosophical convictions consciously is another key factor of becoming more conscious. And what this means is knowing what you think about things and why, knowing what you believe about reality, knowing and being able to express verbally your fundamental understanding of reality and how you relate to it. So it's basically being able to put into words what you think about stuff. And obviously, unless you've done some thinking about things, the chances are that you might struggle with that. So that's another useful manifestation of becoming more conscious, being aware of your understanding of reality. So in terms of becoming more conscious, very often we hear the metaphor of waking up. We hear about people waking up to the whatever it is, the global conspiracy, or waking up to this, waking up to that. It's an often used phrase that has some validity, because we might speak of the sort of the greater masses as being asleep. So there is some use in this metaphor, but I think there are just a couple of points to make that we need to be aware of when using this waking up analogy, because waking up is essentially an automatic process that takes place once the body's had a sufficient rest. It's not something that you have to initiate. It's not something that you do. So on the other hand, becoming more conscious or gaining awareness is very much something that has to be sought. It has to be proactively sought. Excuse me. You have to do it. You have to. It takes thinking. It takes asking questions, wanting to know. It takes effort. Basically, it takes effort, and you've got to initiate something. Waking up is automatic. And there are two more points that are closely related, but also with waking up, once you're awake, there's nothing else to do. You're there. You've achieved it. You're on that plateau, as I mentioned earlier, being conscious, being actively engaged with our senses. But that is like the ground zero from which you start to increase awareness of more and more things. But with being awake, it's you're either asleep or you're awake. It is that binary situation. So that's one important gotcha, is that even if not consciously, it can lull some people into a sense of thinking, well, I'm awake, I know about this, I know about that, I know about false flag terrorism, I know a few things, I'm awake. And it can have there's a danger that it can lead to complacency. It can lead us to not continue to seek out information, not to keep looking and expanding upon our knowledge. And the other problem with the metaphor, is that becoming more conscious is an ongoing process. And of course, again, waking up is just a one-time event. Once you've done it, we don't usually talk about people falling back asleep in terms of their awareness of global issues generally. But anyway, so waking up is a useful metaphor, but I think we need to use it with caution because of those limitations. What about how can we actually increase our awareness? How can we become more conscious? Well, the first step, I think, is to be curious. It's to nurture our curiosity. And all too often, this has been beaten out of us by our schooling experience. For many of us. But if we can rekindle our curiosity, if it's that first cause of knowledge, that desire to understand, to want to know how does that work? Why is that so? You hear that something is a good idea, or we should all do that, or whatever. Why? Such an important question to ask ourselves is why. So in terms of becoming more conscious, we don't need to accept what we are told until we have an understanding of it that we genuinely agree with, and preferably an understanding that we can actually explain, put into words. So be curious, seek knowledge, and don't accept things that we're told until we've really sort of got a firm grasp of an understanding on it. And this leads me reminds me of a classic myth within the Matrix, that the myth of that talking to oneself is a sign of madness. First sign of madness is talking to yourself, which is obviously, well, not obviously, but it's complete nonsense. Because the process of talking to ourselves, the process of verbalizing our thinking, making it explicit, is a great way of getting our concepts into logical order. It exposes those thoughts and ideas to logical scrutiny as soon as we put them into words. Because if I'm trying to explain something to myself or to anyone, if it comes out all nonsensical and everyone scratches their head and says he's talking rubbish, then obviously I haven't got my concepts in order, I haven't got my thinking in order. So talking to ourselves is something we can do on our own to run thoughts around our head and practice exposing them to logic to rational, logical scrutiny by expressing them verbally. So that's just a little aside. It's a big myth that it's a sign of insanity and madness to talk to yourself. It's actually really, really helpful, very helpful. So the next main point on becoming more aware is that we can't turn up our senses. Okay, we've got our five senses, and assuming that they're working to their maximum potential, assuming that your eyes, ears, nose, etc., sense of touch and what have you, is all working to the best of its ability, you can't crank it up anymore. You can't become more aware of that sound you're listening to, or that scene that you're looking at. It's either you're actively tuned in and receiving information and assimilating it and integrating it, or you're not. But what we can turn up is our conceptual understanding. And it's important to notice, therefore, that our main means of becoming more conscious is to increase our conceptual understanding, which is another way of saying increasing our knowledge of reality. And this is the fundamentally human, it's the defining attribute that makes us human, effectively, our ability to think conceptually, to see patterns in reality effectively, and to use reason, logic, to deduce and infer. We can build a sum of knowledge about reality and therefore see a bigger picture and have that greater context through our mental faculty of thinking, essentially, of reasoning. So this is our uniquely human ability. And I would suggest, as another brief aside, that when we do this, when we exercise that one faculty that's uniquely human, it feels good. It's a great thing to get into the habit of doing. And this is the essence of thinking for ourselves, thinking conceptually. So with respect to that, we can, or as an example of that, we can learn to think in principles, not always looking at individual concrete examples of something, but spotting a principle and thinking in principles. And also, another thing we can do is for example, is to define, be very precise, in our definitions of all our concepts. That's a very useful thing to do to gain a greater understanding. So, I mean, in a word, we can increase the efficiency of our thinking. And it's our thinking that's going to be the tool that increases our conceptual awareness and our understanding of reality. So one final point on how we can increase our awareness and become more conscious is to think beyond the range of the moment, to deliberately it's that greater context thing again. It's the 30,000 foot view looking down. It's looking beyond the range of the moment, being very future orientated, learning from the past and planning from the future. Now, it's very popular within the Matrix with things like, being present, being in the now. The now's all there is. It's just a rolling now. We've got to be present. That's where to focus. We've got to be really careful with that, because our lives occur over a sum of years, and it's very much in our interest to zoom out and see that sum of years in its entirety. Do a how's it going check. How's that going? Is my life on track? Am I achieving my goals? Is my relationship going well? Should I be in another one? Should I be in another job? Where do I want to be in 20 years' time? This is really important with health issues, with basic habits that we've got from within the Matrix, where we eat bread and we eat processed carbs and sweets and sugars. freely, and the mainstream view is don't worry, just eat a balanced diet, just eat a few vegetables and you'll be okay. No, that's not true, because if we remember to think long range, if we can think long term, that really helps, because then we can see that if you eat the wrong food, in 20 years later, you're going to be susceptible to a heart attack or dementia or diabetes. All of these chronic diseases, all really easily prevented by a bit of long-term thinking, by becoming more conscious of the implications of our actions over the long term. So yeah, it's thinking long-term, thinking beyond the range of the moment, thinking beyond the range of your immediate surroundings as well, of course. So it's important to remember, of course, that awareness is not everything. So being conscious of things in and of itself is not the end game, because we must act. And having the knowledge, having the conscious awareness is the start, if you like. But then we have to choose, we have to decide, we have to judge, and then act appropriately. So just wanted to mention that it's not all about just becoming conscious of stuff and saying, it's great, I'm conscious of it. We have to act. And again, with health issues, as a very useful example, it's a great example because health's really important. We all don't want to die next week. It's so important with health issues because we have to implement the knowledge that we gain. We cannot just sit back on our laurels and think, well, I know how to be healthy. We have to implement. We have to enact our knowledge. We have to manifest our knowledge, if you like, demonstrate our knowledge. And that way we can look 20 years down the road and see ourselves confidently hop-skipping around in a healthy, fully functioning body, or 40 or 50 years hence. So awareness is not all, we must act as well. So by way of something of a summary, becoming more conscious is a very desirable thing. We should all seek to do it. It's the way out of the matrix. It's the way to be in command of your own life. It's the way to be the author of your own life. It's the way to take control. It's the way to enjoy your life more. It's the way to be healthier. And becoming more consciousness is essentially achieving greater conceptual awareness. It's getting all of your mental files, as it were, into non-contradictory order. It's thinking rationally. That's very much a part of the process, becoming more conscious. It's connecting with reality accurately and consistently. It involves things like geopolitical awareness, awareness of what's going on in the world, social awareness, what's going on in your life, in your social circles, in any particular social situation. How are you choosing to act? It's being self-aware as well, as we mentioned, being aware of our own motivations and all of these things, aware of our limitations, of our positive habits, of our negative habits. How do we tick? Very, very important information for a successful life. Another aspect that I think we need to know for if we're aspiring to become more conscious is we need to know about things like our rights. We need to know a little bit about politics. We need to know how free we are and how free we aren't. So ultimately, I think becoming more conscious, is a key factor of what personal development is all about. If personal development is about becoming the best version of ourselves possible, developing all our abilities and skills, then at the core of that, we need to become more conscious to gain more knowledge, more awareness. So anyway, I do hope this helps. I would suggest that please visit the website lawfulrebel.com for loads more about this and other topics to help us thrive, to help us sift through the disinformation to achieve, the best lives we can live. So thank you very much for listening, and I do hope you'll join me again for another episode of Living Outside the Matrix.